The radio operator at McMurdo Station sat frozen, headphones pressed tight against his ears, replaying the transmission for the seventh time. It was 3:27 a.m. on November 14th, 2018, and Dr. Alan Friedman's voice crackled through the static with words that made no sense, words that violated every principle of Antarctic geology the operator had learned during his training. "This is Friedman at Lake Ellsworth drill site. Emergency. The ice broke through into a cavity approximately 800 meters below the surface. I've fallen approximately 40 meters down a vertical shaft. I'm injured, but alive. But that's not the problem. The problem is what I'm seeing down here. There's light. Not my headlamp. Light coming from somewhere below. And structures. Geometric patterns in the rock walls that aren't natural. Temperature readings are impossible, 22 degrees Celsius. That can't be right. I'm going to try to descend further while I still have battery. If anyone receives this, the maps are wrong. Everything we thought we knew about this region is wrong. There's something down here, something that's been here a very long time. I'm going to document what I can. Friedman out." Then silence. The rescue teams launched within the hour, found the drill site, found the collapsed ice, found the shaft descending into darkness. But they never found Dr. Alan Friedman, not his body, not his equipment, not a single trace beyond that impossible transmission that was immediately classified and has never been publicly acknowledged until the recordings leaked 3 years later. If you're drawn to suppressed scientific discoveries and classified incidents that governments work hard to keep hidden, then you'll want to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened to Dr. Friedman represents one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern Antarctic research. Share this investigation with anyone who questions the sanitized versions of exploration we're given. And if what you discover here resonates with your sense that our planet holds secrets that institutions don't want revealed, leave a like to help this reach others searching for truth beyond official narratives. Dr. Friedman's disappearance isn't just another Antarctic tragedy. It's a doorway into questions about what lies beneath the ice, about discoveries that are made and then buried, and about the price paid by those who glimpse truths that powerful interests would rather keep hidden. Dr. Alan Friedman was 43 years old at the time of his disappearance, a respected geologist from Cambridge University who specialized in glacial geology and Antarctic research. He had made 6 previous trips to Antarctica over 15 years, publishing extensively on ice core analysis, subglacial geology, and the continent's formation. His academic credentials were impeccable, his reputation for rigorous methodology unquestioned. This was not a man prone to hallucination or exaggeration. When Friedman transmitted his final words describing impossible conditions beneath the Antarctic ice, the people who knew him understood he was reporting exactly what he observed, even if what he observed contradicted everything they thought they knew about Antarctic geology. That contradiction is what made his transmission so disturbing to authorities, and what ultimately led to its classification. The Lake Ellsworth drill site where Friedman disappeared was part of a British Antarctic survey project investigating subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water trapped beneath kilometers of ice. The project had been attempting to drill through the ice sheet to reach Lake Ellsworth, a subglacial lake roughly 8 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide located in West Antarctica. The drilling operation had encountered numerous technical challenges, but by November of 2018, they were approaching breakthrough depth. Friedman was on site as the geological consultant, responsible for analyzing core samples and advising on drilling procedures to ensure the lake environment wasn't contaminated when they broke through. He was working alone in a temporary shelter near the drill rig when the ice collapsed beneath him, dropping him into a cavity that shouldn't have existed according to all previous geophysical surveys of the region. In the hours immediately following Friedman's transmission, confusion reigned at McMurdo Station and at the Lake Ellsworth site. The drill team hadn't broken through to the lake yet, so the cavity Friedman described shouldn't exist. Geophysical surveys using ice-penetrating radar had mapped the region extensively, showing solid ice extending down to bedrock, with Lake Ellsworth as the only significant void space. A cavity large enough for Friedman to fall into, with a vertical shaft extending below it, had never been detected in any survey. Yet Friedman's transmission clearly described falling into exactly such a feature. The immediate question was whether the drilling operation had somehow created the cavity, destabilizing ice and causing a collapse, or whether the cavity was a natural feature that had been missed in surveys. Rescue teams reached the drill site within 4 hours of Friedman's transmission. What they found was a collapse site approximately 15 meters across where the surface ice had given way, creating a crater-like depression. The temporary shelter where Friedman had been working was partially intact at the crater's edge. Inside the shelter, his personal belongings remained undisturbed. His laptop showed notes from his work that day, and his emergency locator beacon was still in its storage case, indicating he hadn't had time to activate it before falling. At the center of the collapse site, the rescue team found the shaft Friedman had described, a nearly vertical opening descending into darkness. Lowering lights and cameras into the shaft revealed smooth walls that didn't look like typical ice or rock, and the shaft continued beyond the depth their equipment could immediately explore. The rescue mission faced immediate challenges. The shaft was too narrow for personnel in full safety gear to descend easily. The walls appeared unstable, with the risk of further collapse. And crucially, there was no response to calls or radio transmissions directed down the shaft. Friedman's emergency radio should have had sufficient range to communicate from any reasonable depth, but there was only silence. The rescue team set up equipment for a more extensive search, including specialized climbing gear, additional lighting, and communication relays that could extend radio range into the shaft. But as they prepared for the descent, they received orders from McMurdo Station to halt operations and await further instructions. Those instructions, when they came, were unexpected. The site was being classified as a military security area. The rescue team was being relieved by a different unit, and all personnel present during the incident were being flown to McMurdo for debriefing. The military security designation shocked everyone involved. Rescue operations in Antarctica are handled by civilian scientific support personnel and are never classified. The Antarctic Treaty explicitly prohibits military activities except in support of scientific research. Yet here was a rescue operation being taken over by what appeared to be military or intelligence personnel operating under some form of special authority. The original rescue team complied, having no choice given the hierarchical nature of Antarctic operations, where McMurdo Station coordinates all activities. They were flown out that evening, debriefed individually, ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements, and told that the incident involved sensitive research that required confidentiality. None were told what happened to Friedman, or what the follow-up team found when they descended into the shaft. The wall of secrecy that descended around Lake Ellsworth was absolute and has remained in place ever since. What happened in the days and weeks following Friedman's disappearance has been pieced together from fragmentary accounts, leaked documents, and testimony from individuals willing to speak anonymously about their involvement. A specialized team arrived at Lake Ellsworth within 36 hours of the incident, bringing equipment that went far beyond standard rescue gear. The team included individuals whose backgrounds suggested intelligence or military special operations rather than Antarctic research. They established a perimeter around the collapse site, restricted all access, and began what was described in communications as an investigation of geological anomalies. No updates were provided about Friedman's status, with official communications stating only that the search was ongoing and that challenging conditions were hampering efforts. The specialized team descended into the shaft using advanced climbing equipment and what witnesses described as unusual breathing apparatus, despite the shaft being accessible without supplemental oxygen, according to Friedman's transmission. Multiple personnel went down, spending hours below the surface before returning. Those who observed the team members when they emerged noted that they appeared shaken, conferring intensely in low voices, and maintaining strict communication security. Nothing about their findings was shared with the Lake Ellsworth drill team or with other McMurdo personnel. Instead, additional equipment was flown to the site, including what appeared to be extensive surveying and communications gear, suggesting that whatever was found required detailed documentation and secure reporting back to undisclosed authorities. After 1 week, the classified investigation concluded at least its on-site phase. The shaft was sealed using explosives that collapsed the opening, officially to prevent further dangerous access to unstable geological features. The collapsed site was buried under transported snow and ice, obliterating surface evidence of the cavity. The drill site equipment was dismantled and removed, with the official explanation that the Lake Ellsworth drilling project was being suspended due to technical difficulties and funding constraints. The British Antarctic Survey issued a brief statement acknowledging that a geologist had gone missing during operations, and that despite extensive search efforts, Dr. Alan Friedman could not be located. The statement expressed condolences to his family and indicated that the investigation into the incident was ongoing. That was the last official word. The investigation's findings were never released. Friedman was never found, and the Lake Ellsworth project never resumed despite years of planning and significant investment. For 3 years, the only evidence of what actually happened at Lake Ellsworth, beyond dry official statements, was held by those who had been present and were bound by non-disclosure agreements. Then in December of 2021, audio files appeared on several internet platforms claiming to be the full radio transmission from Dr. Friedman. The recordings included not just his initial distress call, but also additional transmissions he made from deeper in the shaft. Transmissions that were never mentioned in any official account. The authenticity of these recordings has been disputed, with authorities claiming they are fabrications, but multiple audio forensics experts who examined the files found no evidence of manipulation or artificial generation. The voice patterns matched known recordings of Friedman, and the acoustic characteristics were consistent with someone transmitting from an enclosed underground space. The leaked audio revealed that Friedman had continued transmitting periodically as he explored the shaft and the cavern system beyond it. His second transmission, time-stamped approximately 45 minutes after his initial call, described descending roughly 70 meters further using climbing techniques and following a passage that sloped downward from the shaft. His voice remained calm, but carried an undercurrent of profound confusion as he described surroundings that made no geological sense. I've reached a larger chamber. The walls are definitely not natural ice or rock. They're too smooth, too regular. There are patterns like carved reliefs covering the surfaces. The light I mentioned earlier is stronger here. It's coming from veins or channels in the walls themselves, some kind of luminescence. The air temperature has increased to 26 degrees, which is absolutely impossible at this depth and location. My instruments aren't malfunctioning, but I've checked them multiple times. I don't understand what I'm looking at. This suggests habitation, suggests engineering, but that can't be. Not here. Not at this depth beneath Antarctic ice. A third transmission approximately 20 minutes later captured Friedman's voice with increased urgency, but also wonder. I found artifacts, objects that are clearly manufactured, some kind of metal or alloy that doesn't look like anything I recognize. The shapes are unusual, not matching any tools or items I'm familiar with. And there are inscriptions, symbols carved into surfaces. This is beyond my expertise, but they look like writing, organized, systematic symbols that repeat in patterns. I'm taking photographs with my phone for documentation. Battery is at 60%. I need to decide whether to go back and report this or continue exploring while I can. If I leave, they might seal this off before proper investigation. But if I continue and something happens, no one will know what I've found. I'm going to continue for another 30 minutes, document as much as I can, then attempt to climb back. The fourth and final transmission in the leaked audio was the most disturbing. Timestamped nearly 90 minutes after the initial call, Friedman's voice carried clear distress. I'm lost. The passages branch in multiple directions, and I've lost track of the route back. I can hear something, movement in the distance, echoes that don't sound like ice settling or geological sounds. There's something down here with me. I know how that sounds, but I can hear it. And I found something else, as a chamber with what looks like equipment or machinery of some kind. It's inactive, I think, but the design is completely unfamiliar. This is first contact. This is evidence of intelligence operating in Antarctica at unknown time depth. They need to know this. They need to send proper teams to investigate. I'm going to try one more direction to find the way back. If I can't, I'll stay put and wait for rescue. There's water seeping from the walls here, drinkable if necessary. Temperature is stable. I can survive for days if needed. Please, whoever receives this, make sure this gets to proper authorities. This is the most important discovery in human history. Friedman out. Then silence. Those were the last words anyone heard from Dr. Alan Friedman, assuming the leaked audio is genuine. Dr. Friedman's family, his wife and 2 teenage children, were informed of his disappearance within 24 hours of the incident, but received minimal information about the circumstances. They were told he had fallen into a crevasse during routine fieldwork, that rescue efforts were underway, and that they should prepare for the possibility that recovery might not be possible given Antarctic conditions. As days passed with no updates, the family's confusion and distress grew. They were told that the search had been called off due to dangerous conditions and that Friedman was presumed deceased. When they pressed for details, requesting access to reports and documentation of the search efforts, they encountered bureaucratic barriers and classification claims that prevented release of information. Friedman's widow, Dr. Sarah Chen, herself a physicist at Cambridge, refused to accept the minimal explanation she was given. She filed Freedom of Information requests with the British Antarctic Survey, the Natural Environment Research Council, and the Foreign Office, seeking any and all documentation related to her husband's disappearance. The responses were frustratingly consistent. Most documents were classified for national security reasons. Other records could not be located, and some information was withheld under exemptions related to ongoing investigations or to protecting private information. The classification of documents related to what should have been a straightforward, though tragic accident, struck Dr. Chen as deeply suspicious, indicating that something more than an accidental death had occurred. Dr. Chen reached out to her husband's colleagues, to other Antarctic researchers, and to anyone who might have information about what happened at Lake Ellsworth. Most had heard only official accounts and could offer no additional insights. But a few, speaking confidentially, mentioned rumors that circulated within the Antarctic research community after Friedman's disappearance. Rumors of an extraordinary discovery, of military involvement, of a site being sealed and rendered permanently inaccessible. These rumors were vague and second-hand, but their existence suggested that people who worked in Antarctic research suspected the official story was incomplete. One colleague mentioned having heard about a geologist who found something he shouldn't have before communications went dark. The specificity, even in a vague rumor, resonated with Dr. Chen sensed that her husband had encountered something significant that authorities wanted kept secret. When the audio recordings leaked in 2021, Dr. Chen heard her husband's voice describing impossible conditions and extraordinary discoveries. If the recordings were authentic, they explained everything: why the incident was classified, why documentation was withheld, why his body was never recovered, despite supposedly extensive search efforts. The recording suggested that Friedman hadn't simply fallen into a crevasse, but had accessed something that posed challenges to established understanding of Antarctica, something that required suppression to avoid difficult questions about what else might be hidden beneath the ice. Dr. Barbara Chen went public with her belief that the recordings were genuine and that authorities had covered up the true circumstances of her husband's disappearance. She called for declassification of all documents related to the Lake Ellsworth incident and for independent investigation of what happened. Her calls were ignored by authorities, but amplified by researchers and journalists interested in Antarctic mysteries. To understand why Friedman's transmission was so immediately disturbing to anyone with knowledge of Antarctic geology, we need to examine what he described and why it contradicts established understanding. Antarctica's ice sheet averages roughly 2 kilometers in thickness, with some regions where ice extends more than 4 kilometers deep. Beneath this ice is rock, the Antarctic continental crust, that, like all continental crust, consists of various geological formations, primarily granite, sedimentary rocks, and volcanic rocks in some regions. Between the ice and the rock in certain locations are subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water kept from freezing by a combination of pressure from the ice above and geothermal heat from below. This basic structure, ice, water, rock, is well understood and well mapped through decades of geophysical surveys. What Friedman described violated this structure in multiple ways. First, the cavity he fell into shouldn't exist. Ice doesn't form large, empty voids in its interior under the pressures present in Antarctic ice sheets. Any cavity that formed through melting or other processes would be filled with water or would collapse under pressure. The existence of a stable air-filled cavity beneath 800 meters of ice suggests either that the cavity was very recently formed, perhaps by the drilling operation itself, or that it's being maintained by some mechanism that prevents collapse. Neither explanation fits comfortably with standard glaciology. Second, the smooth, regular walls Friedman described don't match natural ice or rock formations. Ice caves, where they occur, have irregular organic shapes formed by melting and refreezing. Rock caverns show fracture patterns, erosion features, and geological variations. Smooth, regular walls suggest artificial excavation or shaping. Third, and most impossibly, the temperature Friedman reported, 22 to 26 degrees Celsius, cannot occur at that depth beneath Antarctic ice under natural conditions. The ambient temperature at 800 meters depth in Antarctic ice should be approximately minus 15 to minus 20 degrees Celsius, depending on location and season. Even near subglacial lakes, where geothermal heat keeps water liquid, the temperature is typically just above freezing, around 0 to 2 degrees Celsius. Reaching 22 degrees would require heat sources orders of magnitude more powerful than typical geothermal gradients provide. The only natural explanation would be volcanic activity, but there's no known volcanism in the Lake Ellsworth region. An artificial heat source, some kind of heating system maintaining comfortable temperatures in the cavern, would be required to produce the conditions Friedman described. Fourth, the light Friedman reported, luminescence emanating from the walls without any external power source, has no standard geological explanation. Some minerals exhibit phosphorescence or fluorescence, glowing faintly when exposed to radiation or after being illuminated, but these effects are weak and temporary. Sustained bright illumination of the kind Friedman described would require either bioluminescence, organisms that produce light through biochemical reactions, or some artificial lighting system. Neither fits with the deep Antarctic environment where no known organisms exist, and where artificial systems would require power sources and maintenance. Every element of Friedman's description suggested an environment that couldn't exist naturally, pointing toward the conclusion he reached in his transmissions, that the cavity and whatever lay beyond it represented engineering, intelligent design, rather than natural formation. Friedman's discovery, if the leaked audio is authentic, was not the first time Antarctic research has encountered anomalies that challenge conventional understanding. The history of Antarctic exploration includes numerous incidents where unexpected findings were reported and then classified or explained away. Operation High Jump in 1947, the largest Antarctic expedition ever mounted, was terminated abruptly after 8 weeks, despite plans for 6 to 8 months, with extensive documentation classified for national security reasons. Russian drilling operations at Lake Vostok, the largest known subglacial Antarctic lake, encountered unusual findings in the early 2000s that were mentioned in scientific papers but never fully described publicly. Various expeditions have reported magnetic anomalies, unexpected temperature variations, and unusual geographical features that don't match theoretical predictions. The pattern suggests that Antarctica holds secrets that don't fit comfortably into publicly acknowledged scientific frameworks. Whether these secrets involve ancient civilizations, hidden ecosystems, unusual geological processes, or something else entirely remains debated. But the consistent response of classification and suppression indicates that authorities, whether scientific institutions or government agencies, have repeatedly judged that certain Antarctic discoveries should not be publicly revealed. The reasons for this suppression could be innocent, avoiding public confusion or protecting sensitive research locations from uncontrolled access, or could be more sinister, preventing discoveries that would challenge powerful interests or reveal that previous official accounts were misleading. Either way, the pattern establishes context for understanding why Friedman's discovery would be immediately classified, rather than celebrated, as an extraordinary finding. Some researchers have drawn connections between reported Antarctic anomalies and ancient maps showing the continent's coastline in detail that shouldn't have been possible without modern surveying technology. The Peary Race map from 1513 and other historical maps allegedly depict Antarctic coastal features that are now hidden beneath ice, suggesting that either the continent was ice-free in relatively recent historical times, or that advanced civilizations once had knowledge of Antarctica that has since been lost. While mainstream cartographers dispute these interpretations, arguing that the maps show other continents or are based on speculation rather than actual surveys, the persistent claims highlight broader questions about Antarctica's past. If the continent was ice-free during human history, or if earlier civilizations explored it before modern times, evidence of such activity would likely exist beneath the ice, potentially including structures or artifacts of the kind Friedman described finding. One dimension of Antarctic's subglacial research that receives less attention than ice cores or geological studies, but that's potentially relevant to the Friedman case, involves microbiology. Scientists have discovered that subglacial lakes contain ecosystems of bacteria and other microorganisms that have been isolated beneath the ice for millions of years. These organisms have adapted to extreme conditions, including darkness, high pressure, and limited nutrients, developing unique metabolic pathways and potentially representing early branches of life's evolutionary tree. The discovery of life in such extreme environments has implications for astrobiology, suggesting that life might exist on icy moons or in other locations previously thought too hostile for biological activity. But the microbiological research in Antarctica is also sensitive because of potential biosecurity implications. Unknown microorganisms that have evolved in isolation could potentially pose health risks if brought to the surface and exposed to human or environmental systems that have no immunity or adaptive defenses. International protocols govern research on subglacial lakes specifically to prevent contamination in both directions, avoiding introducing surface microbes into pristine subglacial ecosystems, while also carefully containing any organisms extracted from those environments. If Friedman encountered an ecosystem in the cavern beneath Lake Ellsworth, particularly if that ecosystem included unusual or advanced organisms, it would immediately trigger biosecurity protocols and could explain some of the classification and restricted access that followed his disappearance. Some of the leaked accounts from personnel involved in the aftermath of Friedman's disappearance mentioned that the specialized team that arrived wore biosecurity equipment, protective suits that went beyond cold weather gear, suggesting they were concerned about biological contamination. This detail, if accurate, indicates that biological considerations were part of the emergency response. Whether the concern was about protecting Friedman and rescuers from potential microbiological hazards or about preventing surface contamination of a unique subsurface ecosystem is unclear. But the presence of biosecurity measures in an Antarctic rescue operation is unusual enough to warrant attention and suggests that biological factors were part of whatever was discovered or suspected about the cavern into which Friedman had fallen. The most radical interpretation of Friedman's transmission, and the one that most researchers hesitate to embrace due to its extraordinary implications, is that the structures and artifacts he described represent technology from an unknown civilization. This interpretation requires explaining who created the technology, when, and why evidence of such a civilization isn't more widespread. But accepting this interpretation resolves the mysteries that conventional explanations struggle with. If an advanced group created the cavern system for some purpose, they could have engineered it with proper support to prevent collapse, installed heating and lighting systems that continue to function, and left artifacts that Friedman encountered. The inscriptions he described could be writing from this unknown civilization, potentially containing information that would be invaluable if it could be deciphered. The civilization question branches into multiple possibilities. One is that human civilization is older and more sophisticated than mainstream archaeology acknowledges, with advanced cultures existing tens of thousands of years ago that explored Antarctica before ice covered the continent. Evidence of such civilizations would be scarce if they existed long enough ago that most traces have been destroyed or buried, but installations in protected Antarctic locations might have survived. Another possibility is that a separate intelligent species evolved on Earth alongside humans or before humans, perhaps living in isolated regions including Antarctica and maintaining presence there even as ice covered the continent. This would challenge fundamental assumptions about humanity being the only intelligent species Earth has produced, but would explain technological capabilities without requiring ancient human civilizations for which evidence is limited. A third possibility, popular in some research communities but dismissed by mainstream scientists, is that extraterrestrial intelligence has established facilities in Antarctica, choosing the remote continent for operations with minimal human interference. This interpretation aligns with reports of unusual aerial phenomena in Antarctic skies, and with some of the alleged findings from Operation High Jump and other classified expeditions. However, the extraterrestrial hypothesis faces the challenge of explaining why such a civilization would maintain hidden Antarctic bases rather than making open contact, and it requires accepting the reality of extraterrestrial visitation that official sources deny. Each interpretation of the technology question faces evidential and theoretical challenges, but all share the common element of suggesting that something beyond conventional understanding exists beneath Antarctic ice, something that Friedman encountered and that authorities don't want publicly acknowledged. One of the most troubling aspects of the Friedman case is what didn't happen after his transmission. Standard protocol for any emergency in Antarctica involves immediate mobilization of rescue resources. McMurdo Station maintains search and rescue capabilities specifically for incidents like what Friedman experienced. The response should have been straightforward. Send trained personnel with appropriate equipment to the site, assess the situation, and attempt to locate and extract the missing researcher using established confined space rescue techniques. This should have happened quickly, within hours, maximizing the chance of finding Friedman alive if he was injured or trapped, but survivable. Instead, the response was bureaucratic confusion, classification, and eventual military takeover of the site without any apparent priority given to actually rescuing Friedman. This anomalous response pattern suggests that priorities other than rescue became paramount once authorities understood or suspected what Friedman had encountered. If his transmissions indicating artificial structures and artifacts reached command levels, and if those receiving the information believed the claims had merit, the calculus might have shifted from rescue operation to damage control, an investigation of potential sensitive discoveries. Friedman's well-being would become secondary to securing the site, assessing what existed in the cavern, and determining how to manage the information. This prioritization would be morally troubling, but practically understandable from a perspective where protecting national security interests or preventing destabilizing revelations takes precedence over individual lives. The timeline of events supports this interpretation. The original rescue team mobilized quickly and reached the site within 4 hours, consistent with standard emergency response, but they were pulled back before conducting substantial search operations within roughly 12 hours of the incident. The specialized team that replaced them took over 30 hours to arrive, despite the supposed urgency of a rescue operation. This delay indicates the specialized team came from outside Antarctica, probably from another continent, requiring flight time to reach the region. Their deployment was planned response to what the incident represented, rather than immediate reaction to a rescue emergency. The team's focus appears to have been investigation and site control, rather than finding Friedman, explaining why, despite reportedly spending significant time in the cavern system, they never located him, or at least never reported doing so. The official narrative about Friedman's disappearance, that he fell into a crevasse during routine fieldwork and couldn't be recovered due to unstable conditions, is a careful construction that provides plausible explanation while concealing actual events. Crevasses, deep cracks in ice caused by glacial movement, are among the most dangerous features of Antarctic terrain. Researchers working on ice sheets must constantly be aware of crevasse hazards, and despite precautions, accidents occur. Someone falling into a crevasse can be difficult or impossible to rescue if the crevasse is deep, narrow, or structurally unstable. This makes the crevasse explanation convenient for authorities wanting to explain a disappearance without revealing details, as it's believable to anyone familiar with Antarctic dangers, and it explains why recovery wasn't possible without raising additional questions. But the crevasse story doesn't withstand scrutiny when examined against available evidence. The Lake Ellsworth drill site was specifically selected and surveyed to avoid crevasse hazards. Ice-penetrating radar surveys prior to establishing the drill site mapped subsurface features to ensure operations wouldn't encounter unstable ice. Friedman was an experienced Antarctic researcher who understood crevasse dangers and who would have taken appropriate precautions. The temporary shelter where he was working was located in an area deemed safe based on surveys and visual inspection. The sudden collapse that created the cavity into which he fell is not consistent with typical crevasse formation, which occurs through gradual glacial stresses rather than sudden failures. And most critically, the audio transmission, if authentic, clearly describes Friedman falling into a cavity, not a crevasse, and exploring caverns beneath the ice, not being trapped in a crack between ice walls. The careful maintenance of the crevasse cover story, despite these inconsistencies, indicates that authorities judged the truth too sensitive to reveal even years after the incident, when immediate operational security concerns would have faded. This suggests the discovery's significance extends beyond just scientific interest. If Friedman had simply found an unusual geological formation or even evidence of ancient human presence, those findings would be scientifically important, but not necessarily requiring permanent suppression. The persistence of classification implies that what Friedman encountered has ongoing implications, either strategic value, potential dangers, or information that would challenge foundational assumptions in ways that authorities consider unacceptable to reveal publicly. Within the Antarctic research community, responses to the Friedman case have been mixed and largely muted. Publicly, most researchers accept the official narrative about an accident and express sympathy for his family, while avoiding speculation about alternative explanations. Privately, among trusted colleagues, more questions are asked and doubts expressed about whether the full story has been told. But career considerations constrain open discussion. Antarctic research depends on funding from government agencies and international organizations that control access to the continent. Researchers who develop reputations for promoting controversial theories or challenging official narratives risk losing funding and access, effectively ending their Antarctic careers. This creates strong incentive for scientists to maintain public silence about doubts, even when they privately question official accounts. Some researchers have attempted to investigate the Lake Ellsworth site using remote sensing or publicly available data. Satellite imagery of the region shows nothing unusual, just ice sheets indistinguishable from surrounding areas. The drill site infrastructure has been removed, and the surface shows no obvious signs of the collapse or subsequent sealing operations. Ice-penetrating radar data from the region, to the extent it's publicly accessible, shows the expected ice thickness and bedrock depth without indicating anomalous cavities. But researchers familiar with data interpretation note that radar surveys can miss features, particularly if those features are relatively small, or if their geometry doesn't reflect radar signals back to receivers. The absence of anomalies in available data doesn't prove nothing exists, only that nothing is visible in limited observations using specific techniques. Several scientists who knew Friedman and respected his work have stated anonymously that if he reported finding artificial structures beneath the ice, they're inclined to believe he was describing real observations rather than hallucinating or fabricating. His reputation for careful methodology and conservative interpretation of data means his extraordinary claims carry more weight than they would from less credible sources. One colleague stated that Allen was the last person who would jump to unjustified conclusions. If he said he found evidence of engineering, he had compelling reasons for that interpretation. I wish I knew what he actually saw and why we're not allowed to know. This sentiment that Friedman's credibility makes the suppression of his findings particularly troubling is shared by others who knew him professionally, though few are willing to say so publicly. Friedman's case has parallels in other instances where researchers allegedly encountered or discovered phenomena that were subsequently classified or suppressed. In Soviet-era Russia, geologists drilling extremely deep boreholes reported anomalous findings, including unexplained sounds and readings that officials classified rather than investigating further. In various marine research contexts, oceanographers have reported sonar contacts suggesting artificial structures on ocean floors at depths that preclude human construction with known historical technology, with follow-up investigations either not conducted or their findings not released. Closer to Friedman's case, other Antarctic researchers have disappeared under circumstances where official explanations seem incomplete, with families receiving minimal information and incident documentation being classified. These parallel cases suggest a pattern of discoveries at the edges of explored regions, whether deep underground, deep underwater, or beneath ice, that challenge established understanding and that authorities prefer to suppress rather than acknowledge. The pattern could reflect natural human tendency to classify anything unusual as potentially sensitive rather than risk premature disclosure. Or it could indicate that certain types of discoveries genuinely threaten established narratives about Earth's history, human civilization's development, or the uniqueness of human intelligence, prompting suppression to avoid the social and institutional disruptions such revelations would cause. Researchers aware of this pattern understand that making extraordinary claims about discoveries, even with solid evidence, risks professional marginalization and can result in findings being classified rather than celebrated. The Friedman case is notable because, unlike many historical incidents where evidence is ambiguous and relies on second-hand accounts, there's a documented transmission describing his observations in real time. The audio recording, if authentic, provides direct testimony from a credible witness describing phenomena that shouldn't exist according to conventional geology. This makes the case harder to dismiss than incidents where evidence is purely circumstantial or relies on reports made long after events occurred. The existence of the audio recording forces those who would maintain the cover story to either claim the recording is fabricated, a claim that audio forensics doesn't support, or to argue that Friedman was hallucinating or lying, which contradicts everything known about his character and professional integrity. The lack of a comfortable dismissive explanation contributes to the case's enduring fascination for researchers interested in suppressed discoveries. If we accept, for the sake of analysis, that Friedman's descriptions were accurate and that artificial structures exist beneath the Lake Ellsworth region, what can we infer about the technology level represented? Friedman described luminescent walls, temperature control maintaining warm conditions in an environment that should be frozen, smooth, regular excavation suggesting precision machinery, and artifacts made from unfamiliar materials. Each of these elements indicates capabilities beyond what publicly acknowledged human technology achieved historically, suggesting either that unknown groups possess advanced capabilities or that the structures predate human civilization and were created by different intelligence. The luminescent walls Friedman described could represent several technologies. Bioluminescent systems using engineered organisms that produce light are conceivable, though maintaining such systems without external support for extended periods would be challenging. Chemiluminescent materials that store energy and release it as light over time exist, but typically exhaust quickly. More advanced possibilities include photonic materials that capture ambient radiation and convert it to visible light, or exotic power systems that provide electrical energy to lighting elements from sources Friedman didn't observe. The sustained nature of the illumination suggests power systems with remarkable longevity, either because they were designed with extreme durability or because they're maintained by automated systems that have continued functioning for long periods. The temperature control represents even more sophisticated engineering. Maintaining above freezing temperatures in caverns beneath 800 meters of Antarctic ice requires substantial energy input to counter the cold surrounding environment. Geothermal heat might provide some energy, but reaching 20+ degrees Celsius requires active heating. The system would need to be efficient to operate for extended periods without maintenance, suggesting optimization and reliability engineering far beyond typical human historical capabilities. The smooth excavation of caverns and passages indicates either extremely advanced drilling and boring machinery capable of creating precise geometries in ice and rock, or alternatively technologies that don't remove material mechanically, but reshape or phase it through other means. Both implications point toward capabilities that exceed acknowledged technology by substantial margins. The Friedman case raises profound ethical questions about the balance between scientific discovery, individual rights, and institutional interests in managing information. From one perspective, Friedman made a discovery of extraordinary scientific importance that should be shared with the research community and humanity broadly. Suppressing such a discovery prevents advancement of knowledge, deprives the scientific community of information that could reshape multiple fields, and denies the public access to truth about their world. The principle of open science holds that discoveries should be published and shared, allowing peer review and independent verification, with secrecy representing a violation of scientific norms. By this standard, the classification of Friedman's findings is ethically wrong, regardless of what institutional interest might favor suppression. From another perspective, discoveries with potential to destabilize society or that involve unknown risks might require careful management rather than immediate public release. If structures beneath Antarctica represent advanced technology of unknown origin, hasty revelation without proper scientific assessment and social preparation could cause panic, misunderstanding, or dangerous attempts by various groups to access the technology. Responsible management might involve classified initial investigation to understand what was discovered, assessment of implications and risks, and eventually controlled disclosure with appropriate context. By this standard, classification could be ethically justified as protecting public welfare, though questions remain about who has authority to make such decisions and whether extended classification is ever justified. The question of Friedman's rights adds another ethical dimension. He risked his life conducting research and made a discovery that cost him his life. He attempted to communicate his findings, presumably believing they were important enough to share despite personal danger. Does he have a right, or do his survivors have rights to have his discoveries acknowledged rather than erased? The current situation effectively denies Friedman credit for what may have been one of history's most significant discoveries, treats him as a tragic accident victim rather than acknowledging his contribution, and prevents his family from fully understanding what happened to him. The ethical weight of this denial is substantial and arguably outweighs whatever institutional interests favor continued suppression, particularly as years pass and immediate security concerns fade. One complicating factor in analyzing the Friedman case is the possibility of deliberate disinformation mixed with genuine information. Intelligence agencies and security services have long used disinformation techniques to muddy waters around sensitive topics, releasing false information that discredits genuine leaks and makes it difficult for researchers to distinguish authentic from fabricated evidence. In contexts where classified incidents occur and information leaks despite suppression efforts, authorities sometimes respond by adding additional false information to the mix, creating confusion that serves their interest by making the entire topic seem unreliable. The leaked audio of Friedman's transmissions could potentially represent sophisticated disinformation designed to discredit or contaminate the actual story of his disappearance. If authorities wanted to ensure that Friedman's real discoveries remained hidden while appearing to address public interest, they might create fabricated audio that makes exaggerated claims designed to seem unbelievable. Researchers and journalists who investigate based on the fabricated audio would reach dead ends or find contradictions, eventually concluding the whole story is baseless. This would protect the actual classified information while appearing to provide transparency. However, the audio forensics analysis has not revealed evidence of fabrication, and the content of the transmissions is specific and detailed in ways that would be difficult to fabricate convincingly without insider knowledge of Antarctic geology and research operations. Another disinformation technique involves selectively confirming certain aspects of leaked information while denying others, creating confusion about what's true. Officials might acknowledge that Friedman fell into a cavity, confirming the basic accident narrative, while denying that he found anything unusual in that cavity. Or they might acknowledge unusual geological features, while denying any artificial structures or artifacts. By providing partial confirmation, they make their denials of more sensitive elements seem credible, because they're being honest about the parts they confirm. Researchers must navigate this informational terrain carefully, recognizing that even when dealing with genuine leaks, the information landscape may have been deliberately manipulated to serve interest in maintaining core secrets while appearing responsive to transparency demands. If the discoveries Friedman described actually exist beneath Lake Ellsworth, they represent information relevant to all humanity, not just to the British Antarctic Survey or UK government, under whose auspices the research was conducted. The Antarctic Treaty establishes Antarctica as an international scientific preserve with discoveries supposed to be shared among treaty parties. But the treaty also allows for classification of information deemed sensitive for national security reasons, creating tension between transparency ideals and sovereignty concerns. The Lake Ellsworth incident appears to have been handled unilaterally by UK authorities, with possible U.S. involvement given McMurdo Station's role, but whether other Antarctic Treaty parties were informed of the discoveries is unknown. The potential for international conflict over Antarctic discoveries is significant. If one nation discovers something of strategic or scientific value in Antarctica and chooses to suppress that information rather than sharing it, other nations might view this as treaty violation or as unfair monopolization of knowledge or resources. The cooperative framework established by the Antarctic Treaty has kept the continent largely peaceful and scientific rather than becoming contested territory, but that framework depends on all parties operating in good faith. Secret discoveries and unilateral control over sites could undermine the treaty regime, particularly if nations suspect others of gaining strategic advantages through exclusive access to Antarctic resources or knowledge. China, Russia, and other nations with Antarctic interests have invested heavily in research infrastructure in recent years, establishing permanent bases and conducting extensive geological and geophysical surveys. This increased activity reflects both legitimate scientific interests and strategic positioning for potential future changes in Antarctic governance. If rumors circulate in international intelligence and scientific communities about extraordinary discoveries at sites like Lake Ellsworth, nations would be motivated to conduct their own investigations to verify claims and ensure they're not disadvantaged by others' exclusive access to significant findings. The absence of public international controversy about the Friedman case might indicate either that other nations weren't informed of the discoveries or that diplomatic agreements exist to jointly manage information about Antarctic anomalies, with all major parties complicit in maintaining public secrecy. Despite classification and official stonewalling, researchers continue investigating the Friedman case through available channels. Freedom of Information requests are filed with UK and international agencies seeking documentation. Attempts are made to locate and interview personnel who were involved in the aftermath of the disappearance. Technical analysis of the leaked audio continues, trying to extract additional information from background sounds or acoustic properties. Satellite imagery of the Lake Ellsworth region is monitored for any changes or unusual features, and connections are drawn to other Antarctic mysteries, seeking patterns that might illuminate what happened to Friedman and what he found. The research community investigating this case includes professional scientists skeptical of official narratives, independent investigators interested in suppressed discoveries, journalists pursuing stories that mainstream media won't touch, and ordinary citizens fascinated by mysteries at the edges of the known world. This diverse community brings various skills and perspectives, from technical expertise in relevant scientific fields to investigative techniques for tracking down witnesses and documents to creative synthesis that identifies connections across disparate information sources. While fragmented and lacking resources available to official investigations, this community has demonstrated ability to uncover truths that authorities prefer remain hidden, as evidenced by various leaks and disclosures over the years that have come through persistent informal investigation rather than official channels. The likelihood of definitive resolution of the Friedman case depends largely on factors outside investigators' control. If classified documents are eventually declassified, whether through passage of time, legal challenges, or whistleblower actions, comprehensive understanding might become possible. If personnel with direct knowledge decide to speak publicly, despite legal risks and social pressures, first-hand testimony could fill current gaps. If future Antarctic research encounters similar phenomena that can't be suppressed, it might corroborate Friedman's reported findings and vindicate his claims. But absent such developments, the case will remain in evidential limbo, with compelling circumstantial evidence suggesting extraordinary discoveries, but without definitive proof that satisfies skeptical mainstream assessment. Beyond the mystery of what Friedman discovered, his case represents human tragedy that shouldn't be forgotten amid speculation about hidden civilizations and suppressed technology. A dedicated scientist pursuing knowledge lost his life in circumstances that were almost certainly frightening and painful. He died alone, trapped beneath ice, in darkness broken only by mysterious light from unknown sources, aware that he'd made an extraordinary discovery, but unable to ensure that discovery would be properly investigated and credited. His final hours, based on the leaked audio, were spent exploring, documenting, and transmitting information while battery power lasted, hoping that someone would receive his messages and act on them. The courage and commitment to science displayed in those circumstances deserves recognition regardless of what classified investigations eventually concluded about his findings. Friedman's family suffered and continues to suffer from incomplete answers about his fate. They know he disappeared. They've been told he died in an accident, but they don't know what actually happened in his final hours or whether everything possible was done to rescue him. They suspect, based on the classification and stonewalling, that the full story involves discoveries authorities don't want revealed, but suspicion doesn't provide closure or comfort. Dr. Chen has stated that she doesn't need to know the scientific details of what her husband found if such information is genuinely sensitive, but she believes she deserves to know the truth about how he died and whether he could have been saved with different response priorities. The humanitarian dimension of the case, the obligation to treat researchers and their families with honesty and respect, exists independently of whatever strategic or scientific considerations might motivate secrecy about discoveries. The broader Antarctic research community has also been affected by the Friedman case. Researchers working in remote Antarctic locations are aware that if something goes wrong, if they encounter something unexpected or dangerous, the response might not prioritize their safety if other interests are at stake. This knowledge creates undercurrent of concern that can affect morale and willingness to take necessary risks that scientific exploration sometimes requires. The classification of incidents undermines trust in institutions and creates an environment where researchers might hesitate to report unusual findings for fear of being silenced or having their work classified rather than published. These effects on scientific culture and trust represent costs of suppression that extend beyond individual cases to affect the broader enterprise of Antarctic research. Dr. Alan Friedman transmitted his final words from beneath Antarctic ice describing discoveries that defied geological understanding, and then he vanished. Whether he died lost in caverns beneath Lake Ellsworth, whether he was recovered but his fate classified, or whether something else happened remains unknown to those without access to classified files. The cavity into which he fell was sealed, the site abandoned, and official history records only that a geologist died in an unfortunate accident during routine research. But the leaked audio remains, his voice describing impossible light, artificial structures, inscriptions, and artifacts found beneath ice that supposedly covered Antarctica for millions of years. The mystery of what he actually discovered and why discovery required such thorough suppression continues to fascinate and disturb anyone who encounters the case. The enduring power of Friedman's story lies in how it combines documented tragedy with tantalizing hints of extraordinary discovery. This isn't ancient history open to reinterpretation or legend accumulating embellishments over centuries. This happened in 2018 in the era of digital communication and satellite surveillance, involving institutions we interact with and authorities we're told are transparent and accountable. Yet despite modern technologies and democratic norms, something happened beneath Antarctic ice that was immediately classified, remains classified today, and shows every sign of remaining classified indefinitely. The brazenness of this suppression, hiding significant discoveries in plain sight while maintaining cover stories that don't withstand scrutiny, challenges faith in transparency and accountability that democratic societies claim to provide. For those who believe the leaked audio is authentic, Friedman's transmission represents one of the most important documents in human history. First-person testimony of contact with evidence of intelligence operating in Antarctica at some point in the past, potentially the distant past. If structures, artifacts, and inscriptions exist as he described, proper investigation could revolutionize understanding of Earth's history, human civilization's development, and possibly even our place in the cosmos if the intelligence that created what Friedman found wasn't human. The suppression of such a discovery would be among history's great crimes against human knowledge, preventing advancement of understanding for institutional convenience or strategic advantage. Even for those who remain skeptical about the audio's authenticity or who favor conventional explanations for Friedman's observations, the case represents troubling questions about scientific transparency, government secrecy, and the hidden dimensions of Antarctic research that don't appear in public accounts. Dr. Alan Friedman's legacy is a mystery, a voice from beneath the ice describing wonders and impossibilities. Then silence. The frozen continent keeps its secrets, and those who discover those secrets find themselves trapped not just by ice and rock, but by classification and suppression that ensures the world remains ignorant of what lies hidden in one of Earth's last unexplored frontiers. Until classified documents are released, or until future discoveries can't be suppressed, Friedman's final transmission will stand as testimony to the extraordinary and to the lengths authorities will go to ensure some truths remain buried as deep as the Antarctic ice that covers them, waiting for a time when humanity might be ready for such revelations, or perhaps waiting forever, another secret added to the accumulating mysteries that suggest our understanding of Earth and its history remains incomplete in ways we're only beginning to glimpse.